Urban legends have haunted people for years and have been the thing of nightmares for children and adults alike. But where do these tales of the boogeyman and others come from? Where do they all start? And is there any truth behind them? We are determined to find out. Join us on this episode of Chilling Paranormal as we take a look into our first urban legend, the Hook. The urban legend of the Hook has been frightening many teenagers for years. But where did this story start and why? Many believe it was to scare teenagers out of having premarital sex in young pregnancy. I could very well see this point, but as I dug deeper into the origins of one of the most popular urban legends out there, I discovered that there was a much darker side to it, one full of murder, bloodshed, and fear. And the scariest part I found? It was all true. You probably heard the story yourself, or some variation of it. The earliest known tale dates back to the mid-1950s and was even printed in the Dear Abby newsletter that had many readers during that time period. The story goes that a teenage couple drove out to a lover's lane in the middle of the night. As the couple parks the car and things start getting hot and heavy, a loud voice comes over the radio, warning everyone that a deranged lunatic with a hook for a hand has just escaped from the state mental facility nearby. As the girl hears the concern in the broadcaster's voice, she becomes frightened and begs the man to take her home. Out of frustration, the boy cranks the engine and guns the car down the road. The boy pulls up in front of the girl's house, gets out of the car to open her door, and sees the maniac's bloody, dangling hook ripped from its socket. But is there any truth to the story? Or was it just made up to stop kids back in the 50s from doing the popular teenage pastime of parking? The bloody history of the events and people in Texarkana might agree with the latter, but not for the reasons you may be thinking. The Texarkana Moonlight murders were a series of unsolved murders and assaults that haunted Texarkana in the spring of 1946. The serial killer known as the Phantom Killer attacked 8 people within 10 weeks, with 5 of them being fatal. The attacks happened between the dates of February 22nd and May 3rd and sent the town of Texarkana into a state of panic. When dusk came, the city inhabitants would lock their doors and heavily arm themselves, while police patrolled the streets and neighborhoods. Stores sold out of guns, ammunition, and locks. Women would flee to the safety of hotels with their children while their husbands were out of town on business trips. The murders were even written about and printed in several publications nationally and internationally. There was even a 1976 film that was released called The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which is believed to be one of the first slasher films predating Halloween by 2 years. It's loosely based on the events despite its claim that only the names have been changed, and is the reason for over half of the myth and folklore about the attacks that still make their way through the town of Texarkana to this day. The prime suspect of these murders was a man by the name of Yule Sweeney, who was linked to the murders by statements from his wife, but he was never convicted because his wife would never sign her statement or testify against him in court. Although the case fell apart, Sweeney was still sentenced to life by a judge as a habitual car thief. But we will get into more of that later. Let's take a look into the multiple attacks and murders of the Phantom Killer, and the reasons you should really think twice before heading out to your favorite lover's lane this weekend. At around 11:45 p.m. on Friday, February 22nd, 1946, Jimmy Hollis and his girlfriend, Mary Jean LeRae, parked on a secluded road known as Lover's Lane after having seen a movie. The area was an unpaved street about 100 yards from the last of the city's homes. 10 minutes later, a man wearing a white cloth mask like a pillowcase with the eye holes cut out appeared at the driver's side door with the flashlight. Both Hollis and LeRae were ordered out. After they complied, the man struck Hollis in the head twice with a pistol. LeRae would later tell investigators that the noise was so loud she thought he had been shot, when in fact it had been his skull fracturing. Thinking the assailant wanted to rob them, LeRae showed him Hollis's wallet, which had no money in it, after which she was struck with a blunt object. The assailant ordered her to stand and run. She tried to flee toward a ditch, but the assailant ordered her to keep running down the road. LeRae spotted a parked car off to the side, but it was empty. The attacker then caught up with her and asked why she was running. She replied, "Because you told me to." He called her a liar before knocking her down and sexually assaulting her with the barrel of his gun. Even though the Phantom Killer never used a hook in any of his murders, his sickening crimes created an equally horrifying metaphor. Psychologists today believe the gun being used in this way was the inspiration behind the weapon in the well-known urban legend. That you have the idea of a foreign metal object being used in this way, which seems to be psychologically behind the idea of the hook. LaRae eventually managed to escape and flee on foot, running half-mile to a nearby house. She did try to flag down a passing car but was ignored. LaRae was able to wake up the residents of the house and call the police. During all this, Hollis had regained consciousness and managed to flag down a passing car. They left Hollis at the scene and drove to a nearby funeral home where the driver was able to call the police. 30 minutes later, Bill Presley and a few other officers arrived at the scene, but the only one they found was Hollis. LaRae was hospitalized overnight for minor head wounds. Hollis was hospitalized for several days to recover from multiple skull fractures, but both survived the attack. Hollis and LaRae gave conflicting reports to law enforcement on what their attacker looked like. LaRae claimed the man was wearing a white bag over his head with cutouts for the eyes and mouth. Hollis claimed the man was white and around 30 years old, but admitted he couldn't exactly make out the features of the attacker because of being blinded by the flashlight. Law enforcement believed that LaRae and Hollis knew the identity of their attacker and were covering for him. They would be the only ones to see the killer and survive. On March 24th, the bodies of Richard Griffin, 29, and his girlfriend Polly Ann Moore, 17, were found by a passing motorist around 9 a.m. They were found in Griffin's 1940s Oldsmobile and were positioned in the most unusual ways. Griffin was found between the front seats on his knees, head resting against his crossed hands and his pockets turned inside out. Moore was found in the back seat face down. Both were fully clothed and shot in the back of the head. Although both were found in the car, a blood-soaked patch of earth near the vehicle suggested to police that both the victims had been killed outside the car and then put back in. Besides the body, blood, and a .32 caliber shell casing, possibly shot by a Colt, no other evidence was found. All of this happened on a lover's lane called Rich Road, but known today as South Robinson. Police launched a citywide investigation with both the Texas and Arkansas police departments, the Department of Public Safety, and the FBI. Within 3 days, police had conducted interviews with 50 to 60 potential witnesses and found nothing. By March 30th, they had posted a $500 reward for any new information that might solve the case, but it only resulted in no new clues or suspects and over 100 false leads. Betty Jo Booker, 15, had a weekly gig playing her saxophone with a band called the Rhythmeries at the local VFW. On April 14th, after the performance, Betty was picked up by her longtime childhood friend and recent boyfriend, Paul Martin, 16, at around 1:30 in the morning. This would be the last time either of them were seen alive. Martin's body was found first at around 6:30 a.m. on the 14th, lying on his left side by the northern edge of North Park Road. A patch of his blood was also found by a fence further down the road, which suggested to police that Martin was already shot and still tried to escape. He had been shot 4 times, once through the nose, again through his ribs from behind, a third through his right hand, and finally through the back of the neck. Booker's body wasn't found until 11:30 a.m. that same day, and almost 2 miles away from Martin's body. Her body was found behind a tree by a family who were volunteers of the search party. She was lying on her back, fully clothed, with her right hand placed in her jacket pocket. Booker had been shot twice, once through the chest and once in the face. The weapon used was the same used in the first double murder of Griffin and Moore, a .32 caliber automatic Colt pistol. Here's where things really start to get strange. Martin's 1946 Ford Club Coupe was not found until after the bodies were found, and its location was 3 miles away from Booker's body and almost 1.5 miles away from Martin's, parked just outside of Spring Lake Park with the keys still dangling in the ignition. Police were never sure on who was shot first, but knew that both had put up a terrific struggle. A friend of Martin's told police that he didn't think an argument happened between the two victims beforehand, and that Martin had no known enemies. Law enforcement never was able to locate Booker's saxophone at the crime scene, and didn't find it until almost 6 months later on October 24th, still in its case and laid in some underbrush near the place Booker's body was found. After this murder, the police raised their reward of $500 to $1,700 for any new leads, and still came up empty. It's Friday, May 3rd, sometime before 9 p.m. Virgil Starks, age 37, just sat down in his favorite armchair in his ranch-style house on a 500-acre farm off of Highway 67, almost 10 miles outside Texarkana. He turned on his favorite radio program and then started reading the Texarkana Gazette while his wife, Katie, age 36, lays in bed. Katie began to hear noises outside and yelled to Virgil to turn down the radio. That's when she heard the glass of their double-paned window shattering. She ran into the front room of the house to find Virgil slumped down in his armchair and blood running down his shoulder. He had been shot twice in the back of the head through the window, which was only 3 feet away. Katie ran to the phone, and by the time she had cranked the wheel twice to phone the police, she had been shot 2 times in the face through the same window. One bullet entered the right cheek and exited behind her left ear. The second went into her lower jaw just below her lip, breaking it completely and splintered out several teeth before lodging itself under her tongue. She dropped to her knees but quickly recovered herself and ran to get Virgil's pistol from the living room, but couldn't locate the gun because of being blinded by her own blood. She thought that she was going to be killed and ran to her bedroom to leave a note for anyone who found her body. Suddenly, she could hear the killer ripping through the screen on the back porch and then heard him trying to come through the kitchen window. She ran in the opposite direction through the dining room, then the bedroom, down a hallway, through the guest bedroom, and into the living room, and finally out the front door, all while leaving a trail of blood and teeth behind her. She ran across the street to her sister and brother-in-law's house, barefooted and still wearing her blood-soaked nightgown. No one was home, so she then ran 50 yards to a man's house named A.V. Prater. When Prater opened the door, Katie managed to let out a gasp, saying Virgil's dead, before she collapsed to the ground. Prater shot his rifle into the air to summon another nearby neighbor, Elmer Taylor. Taylor, Prater, and his wife and child all rode with Katie in Mr. Prater's car to Michael Meagher Hospital. Although she had lost a lot of blood, Katie showed no signs of going into shock, and her heart rate remained normal. The next morning, in the May 4th, 1946 issue of the Texarkana Gazette, in big bold letters, the headline read, "Murder Rock City Again. Farmer Slain. Wife Wounded." Max Tackett was a 33-year-old rookie at the time for the Arkansas State Police. He realized that a car had been stolen on the nights of the murders, and a previously stolen car was found abandoned. On June 28, 1946, Tackett found a car in a parking lot that had been reported stolen the night of the Griffin murders. He staked out the car until a 21-year-old woman named Peggy Sweeney returned to it, and he arrested her on the spot. In the interrogation, Peggy said she had just married her husband, Yule Sweeney, in Shreveport, and that he was currently in Atlanta, Texas, trying to sell another stolen car. Later, on a Saturday in July, Tackett walked into the Arkansas Motor Coach bus station on Front Street. He saw a man run out the back of the building. Tackett began to chase the man and finally caught him on a fire escape. The man was Yule Sweeney. When Tackett caught him, Sweeney cried out, "Please don't shoot me." Tackett looked at Sweeney and replied, "I'm not going to shoot you for stealing cars." Which Sweeney then replied, "Mister, don't play games with me. You want me for more than stealing cars." Yule would not talk to police after that, but his wife Peggy confessed in scary detail that Sweeney was the Phantom Killer and that he was responsible for the deaths of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin. Back in 1946, by law, Peggy could not be made to testify against her husband. Because of this, Yule was not arrested for murder, but was still sent to prison for being a habitual offender for car theft. Today, the Phantom Killer has still not been caught, and the murders of all these innocent victims have still gone unsolved. Back in 1999 and 2000, an anonymous woman contacted family members of the victims apologizing for what her father had done. It was unknown if this was just a sick prank or a true confession, but was the closest anyone has come to solving the murders. Are these murders behind the inspiration of the well-known urban legend The Hook? We'll probably never know for sure, but the evidence is hard to dismiss. So if you were thinking of heading out to a lover's lane on your date night with your significant other this weekend, just remember, you never know who is watching in the shadows.